The Chris Watts Family Murders, 2018. Welcome back to Uncovering Crime Tailies. Tonight, we dive into one of the most shocking and chilling true crime stories of the 21st century, the brutal murder of Shanann Watts and her two young daughters in Colorado, USA. A husband, seemingly ordinary and loving to the outside world, hiding a darkness so deep it shook the entire nation. A disappearance that began as a mystery, a facade of calm and normalcy, and a horrifying truth that would unravel piece by piece. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear is a story of deception, betrayal, and unimaginable horror. A case that will haunt you long after the story ends. A picture-perfect family. In the small town of Frederick, Colorado, the Watts family seemed like the embodiment of the American dream. Chris Watts worked steadily as an operator at an oil company. His wife, Shanann Watts, was a thriving saleswoman for a health company, known for her vibrant personality and heavy presence on social media. Together, they had two beautiful daughters, Bella 4 and Celeste 3, and another baby boy on the way. On Facebook and Instagram, Shanann often posted cheerful updates about her life, family trips, birthday parties, and videos of her girls singing and laughing. Chris, tall and soft-spoken, often appeared in the background as the quiet, supportive husband. To outsiders, they looked like the perfect couple, raising a happy family in their spacious suburban home. But beneath this picture-perfect surface, something dark was brewing. The day before disappearance. On August 12, 2018, Shanann had been away on a business trip in Arizona. She was 15 weeks pregnant with their third child, a boy they planned to name Niko. During her trip, she had expressed concerns to her close friends about Chris. He had grown distant, uninterested in intimacy, and was acting strangely. Her friends could sense her anxiety. Shanann had always been a determined, open, and emotional woman. She texted one friend saying, "Chris is not himself. Something is off. I don't feel safe about where this marriage is going." Late that night, August 12 turning into August 13, her friend Niko Atkinson dropped Shanann off at her home around 2 a.m. after their flight landed. Shanann quietly walked inside, unaware it would be the last time anyone outside her family saw her alive. The morning of August 13. That morning, Shanann had an important doctor's appointment for her pregnancy. But when she didn't show up, alarm bells rang. She wasn't answering calls or texts. Her friend Niko grew increasingly worried. Niko drove to Shannon's house around noon. The car was still in the garage. The girls' car seats were inside, and Shannon's shoes were by the door. But there was no sign of Shanann, Bella, or Celeste. Niko immediately contacted Chris, who was supposedly at work. Chris sounded calm on the phone and said maybe Shanann had taken the girls somewhere. But Niko felt something was very wrong. She called the police. The police search begins. Officers arrived quickly. Chris pulled into the driveway, greeting them with his usual calm demeanor. He allowed police inside the home. They searched the house, finding Shannon's purse, keys, phone, and medications, all left behind. Nothing made sense. Why would a pregnant mother of two vanish without her belongings? That evening, the story exploded across local news stations. Pregnant Colorado woman and two young daughters missing. Chris appeared before cameras, pleading for their return. He stood on his porch, his voice steady but his body language strangely stiff. He said, "Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. This house isn't the same without you." But something about him didn't feel right. The next few days would unravel one of the most shocking family murder cases America had ever seen. The investigation and cracks in the mask. English version. The disappearance of Shanann Watts and her two little daughters had already begun to dominate local news in Frederick, Colorado. Police officers canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual. Friends and neighbors, deeply worried, gathered outside the Watts residence, their eyes full of fear and suspicion. Something about this disappearance did not feel like a random event. It was far too sudden, far too strange. Chris Watts, meanwhile, played the role of a concerned husband and father. Standing on his front porch, he gave interviews to local TV stations. His voice sounded calm, too calm, as he asked Shanann and the girls to come home. "Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. This house isn't the same without you," he said, looking straight into the camera. But his composure was unnerving. Many viewers who saw that interview later said there was something cold, something detached in his eyes. Instead of a panicked father, he looked more like a man trying to act a part. The police were already sensing that Chris's story didn't quite add up. He said he had left for work early that morning, and Shanann and the kids were still at home. But neighbors reported that they hadn't seen Shanann or the girls all day. One neighbor even allowed police to review his security camera footage. What they saw was chilling. Around 5 a.m., Chris's truck backed into the driveway, something unusual, and stayed there for a long time before leaving. The neighbor told the officers that Chris never parked his truck in that way. Inside the Watts house, detectives noticed small but troubling details. Shannon's purse, phone, and medication were still there. No mother who intended to leave voluntarily would have walked away without them. Then came the interview with Chris inside the police station. He repeated his version of events, insisting that his wife and daughters had simply disappeared. Detectives observed his body language, stiff, rehearsed, almost robotic. It was as if he had memorized every word. To get to the truth, investigators decided to administer a polygraph test. Chris agreed, perhaps thinking he could beat it, but the machine told a different story. The results showed clear signs of deception. When confronted with this, Chris's mask began to slip. Detectives pressed harder, reminding him that lies always fall apart, and sooner or later the truth surfaces. Finally, when he could no longer hold it in, Chris cracked. But instead of admitting everything at once, he tried to shift the blame. He claimed that Shanann had killed the children in a fit of rage, and that he had killed her in retaliation. It was a desperate, hollow story, one that investigators knew could not be true. The police now believed they were dealing not with a grieving husband but with a cold-blooded murderer. All that remained was to find Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. And soon, Chris would lead them straight to the horrifying truth. Confession, discovery, and justice. The investigation had been ongoing for several days. Police knew something was very wrong with Chris Watts, but they had little to go on without the victims. Public pressure was mounting. Media trucks lined the streets, neighbors whispered, and social media was ablaze with theories, accusations, and heartbreak. Finally, on August 15, 2018, Chris Watts agreed to meet investigators at the police station. At first, he repeated the same story, that Shanann had taken the girls and left. But detectives confronted him with the polygraph results, inconsistencies in his timeline, and the evidence from his phone and vehicle. Hours of intense questioning broke him. Around late afternoon, Chris Watts confessed. The words shocked even the seasoned detectives. He admitted to killing Shanann in a fit of rage after she confronted him about wanting a separation. Then, in a calculated act, he smothered Bella and Celeste in their beds while they slept. He claimed he had no plan to kill them, but the act was deliberate, and the horror was complete. Leading the police to the bodies. The confession was chilling, but detectives still needed proof. Chris reluctantly led officers to a remote oil field where he had buried Shanann, Bella, and Celeste in shallow graves. The scene was horrifying. Shovels and disturbed earth bore silent testimony to the atrocity. Shannon's body was found in a shallow grave, wrapped in a blanket, while Bella and Celeste were partially buried nearby. The cruelty of the crime stunned the nation. For many, the horror was compounded by the fact that Chris had maintained the facade of a loving husband and father throughout the investigation. Arrest and charges. Chris Watts was immediately arrested and charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for Shanann, 2 for the girls, and 2 more for the unborn child under fetal homicide laws. The legal proceedings moved quickly due to the overwhelming evidence, including his confession, phone records, and witness statements. Courtroom drama. In November 2018, Watts entered a plea deal to avoid the death penalty, pleading guilty to all 5 murders. The courtroom was tense, the air heavy with grief and outrage. Shanann's family sat stoically, her mother clutching photographs of her grandchildren, struggling to process the unfathomable loss. Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, a legal closure for the victims, but an emotional wound for the entire community. Aftermath and cultural impact. The Chris Watts case became a cautionary tale, a dark reminder that appearances can be deceiving. To the outside world, Chris Watts had seemed like an ordinary, friendly man, a dedicated father and husband. But behind closed doors, he harbored unimaginable darkness. Documentaries, true crime podcasts, and books have since examined every detail of the case. People across the world continue to analyze his behavior, social media posts, and interviews, trying to understand how a man could commit such acts against his own family. For Shanann, Bella, and Celeste, justice in the courtroom could never restore their lives, but it ensured that Chris Watts would never harm another person. Their story remains a chilling, unforgettable chapter in modern true crime history.